Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Me'ez Hashem Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, and we pick up today with Siman Tavkuf Pei Vav Sif Beis on the top line of Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Hagoizel Shofar. If somebody steals Nebuch a Shofar, V'takaboy, and then he uses it to blow Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Yotza, he is Yotza. The people who are listening to the Shofar are Yotza, the mitzvah of Shmias Kol Shofar. Afilu lo nisyashu habayla mimenu, and this is true even if the owners of the Shofar were not miyayish. That means that they didn't give up on getting it back. So if they would have given up on getting it back, that takes away a certain degree of ownership, as we always find by an avodah. When somebody loses something, when he's miyayish, and as Rashi describes, that means the person says, "Vaili l'chisaron kiss." Person says, "Oy, it's terrible that I lost it." He gives up on getting it back. By doing so he gives up a degree of ownership. Over here, even if the owners were not miyayish, so they still have their full degree of ownership over the shofar, and this person stole it. Still in all, if he blows shofar and people hear the blowing of that shofar, they are yotza the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and test, Hagoizel Shofar. Now, the first thing that the Chavetz Chaim sets out to explain is why is this different than, let's say, the mitzvah of lulav, the mitzvah of matzah. By those mitzvahs, we find that if somebody steals a lulav and esrig and tries to be yotza the mitzvah of lulav and esrig with a stolen lulav, he's not yotza. By matzah, if somebody steals matzah and eats the matzah to be become the mitzvah of matzah, of achilas matzah, he's not yotza the mitzvah. So why is it that over here by shofar, even though the shofar is a stolen shofar, you are yotza the mitzvah of shofar? Says the Chavetz Chaim here in Ois Tes. This case of the stolen shofar is not comparable to a stolen lulav, stolen matzah, stolen tzitzits. In by those items, you wouldn't be yotza the mitzvah. Why is it not comparable? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Lefisha mitzvahs ha-shofar einoi ela hashmiya levad. What is the mitzvah of shofar? Like we already described previously, what is the bracha that you make on shofar? The bracha is lishmaya kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. So the mitzvah is the listening, is the hearing of the sound. Levisha mitzvahs ha-shofar einoi ela hashmiya levad. The mitzvah of shofar is hearing the sound. The ein b'shmias kol dine gezel. There is no gezel, there is no theft involved in listening to the sound of the stolen shofar. It's true, you're not allowed to steal the shofar, and the shofar is stolen. But if I'm listening to the sound of the shofar, I'm not stealing the shofar. I have no involvement here in theft. I'm not even using the shofar. I'm hearing a sound that emanated from the shofar. That's not the same as lulav and esrig. By lulav and esrig, if it's a stolen lulav, I am actually taking the lulav and using the lulav. You're using a stolen object. Over here, I'm not using a stolen object. So ve'en b'shmias kol dine gezel. Shaharei b'shmiyasai ein negea b'shofar klal. When you listen to the shofar, are you touching the shofar? Are you handling the shofar? No. It's true the Baal Tekeah is holding the shofar and the Baal Tekeah is blowing in the shofar, but there's no mitzvah of blowing shofar. It's not a mitzvah of tekiyas shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the sound that emanates from the shofar. Well, lefikach, and therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, af al pi shetaka boy be'iser gezel, even though the Baal Tekeah is blowing in the shofar, and that is an Isser Gezel, he's using a stolen shofar. Kevin Shebe'ikar mitzvah, since the main point of the mitzvah, Tahainu Hashmiya, which is hearing the sound, Ein ba Isser Gezel, in that there is no Gezel involved, Yotza Yedei Chayvasai, you are Yotza, the mitzvah of shofar. Now, this reasoning, this rationale, for why you're yotza with a stolen shofar, this is the rationale of the Rambam. Other Rishonim take issue with this. There happens to be a very nice Dirshu footnote here. It's footnote number 12. So if we take a look at Dirshu footnote number 12, it says like this. Tam zeh kosav harambam. This rationale could be found in the Rambam Perik Aleph Mehilchos Shofar Halacha Gimel. V'hiksha b'hasagas haravid sham. The Ravid asks on the Rambam over there, Maduat tzarich l'tam zeh. Why do we need this rationale? Lechalek ben shofar lebein lulav matzah v'tzitzis. The whole reason the Chavetz Chaim brought this down, and the reason the Rambam writes this, is because the Rambam is troubled by the comparison to lulav, matzah, and tzitzis. Like we explained, by those mitzvahs you can't be yaitza if the object of the mitzvah, if the chayfetz shel mitzvah is stolen. And over here by shofar we find that you can. So in order to answer that, the Rambam gave a chilik. The Rambam said, by those mitzvahs, you're doing a mitzvah with the object. You're shaking the lulav. You're wearing the tzitzit. You're eating the matzah. Masha ein kain over here by the shofar, the mitzvah is the shmiya, not the blowing. But the Ravid asks, you don't have to come on to that chilik. There's a much more basic chilik to describe the difference between these mitzvahs. V'harei, af lulei zayis, without this rationale of the Rambam, hatekea b'shofar gazel yotze yedei chayvasai, somebody who blows with a stolen shofar should be yotze the mitzvah, shekein ein b'shofar din lachem, because by shofar there is no requirement min HaTorah of lachem, that the shofar has to belong to you. Koloimar, that is to say, ein hu tzarich lihiyoy shel hayotze b'yedei chayva. There is no requirement that the shofar must belong to the one who's being mekayim the mitzvah. Masha ein kein belulav matzah and tzitzits. And this is different than lulav, matzah, and tzitzits. By these three mitzvahs of lulav, matzah, and tzitzits, we darshan from psukim where the pasuk uses a lashon of lachem. The pasuk requires that it should belong to you. The lulav has to belong to you. The matzah has to belong to you. The tzitzits, the beged, has to belong to you. So you want to know why you can't be yaitza with something that's stolen? Because it doesn't belong to you. And there's a requirement min HaTorah that it should belong to you. We don't find such a requirement by shofar. So why does the Rambam have to come up with this logic that the Iker mitzvah is the shmiyah in order to differentiate between shofar and matzah, lulav, and tzitzis? There's a much more basic chilik. There is no requirement of lachem by shofar. V'kosav, and the Ravid writes, Shebi Yerushalmi yachein muvatam zeh. Indeed, this is the rationale that the Yerushalmi gives. So Yerushalmi doesn't require the Rambam's rationale at all. V'hamagid Mishnah sham kosav, the Magid Mishnah writes over there by the Rambam, Sha'achein taima shal Ravid muva b'Yerushalmi. The Magid Mishnah writes, yes, it is, this rationale of the Ravid is brought in the Yerushalmi. Ulam gam taima shal Rambam muva sham. However, the Magid Mishnah found another Yerushalmi that does indeed give the Rambam's rationale as well. So now we're really stuck, because now not only is it shver that why did the Rambam need this when we have a Yerushalmi that gives a much more basic tam, we have two Yerushalmis. One Yerushalmi gives the tam of the Ravid, and another Yerushalmi gives the tam of the Rambam. Why do we need the Rambam's tam? Ubir Rabbeinu Manayach Sham. So there's a Rabbeinu Manayach that gives a very nice explanation. And he says, Shemasha Rambam nitzrach l'tam she'ein b'kel din gezel. This that the Rambam felt that he had to give this explanation, that there's no gezel involved in the shmiyah of the shofar, hu kidei loymar, he did that in order to explain, madua ein bekach mishum mitzvah haba ba'avera. The Rambam was addressing a different problem. The Ravid said, the reason you're yaitza with a shofar that's guzzle is because there is no requirement of lachem. Came along in the Rambam and said, you're right, there is no requirement of lachem, but there's a more basic problem, not a more basic, but there's another basic problem. And that is, we have the golden rule of a mitzvah haba ba'avera. When you accomplish a mitzvah through the performance of an avera, generally speaking, we say you're not yoitza the mitzvah. So how come over here we don't say that there's a chesaron of mitzvah haba ba'avera? When we come makim yesh livsal as hatikiyas mishum mitzvah haba ba'avera. When we shum kach, in order to answer this problem, Kosav, the Rambam writes, Shekeven cha mitzvah nasis al yidei shmias hakoil, since the ikr mitzvah of the shofar is listening to the sound of the shofar, ubekoil ein din gezel, and by listening to a voice, to a sound, there is no din of gezel, ein bekach mishum mitzvah haba ba'avera. That's why there's no mitzvah haba ba'avera. Very nice footnote. So to encapsulate this tam that the Rambam, that the Chavetz Chaim brings from the Rambam, that the reason you're yoytze the mitzvah of shofar with a stolen shofar is because there's no din gezel on shmiya, you're not stealing anything just by listening to a sound, is to explain why there's no problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera. As far as the problem of the stolen shofar, we could use the Ravid's tam and the Yerushalmi's tam that there's no requirement of lochem. Now let's go back into the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cut and Tess and continue. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. The chol zeh b'shetoka. This is only b'di'evet. If the Baal Tekeah stole the shofar and he blew shofar with the stolen shofar, yoytze b'di'evet. Aval lechatchila asur l'tkaya by ba'al karchei shabal ha-shofar. But lechatchila, certainly, you're not allowed to use the shofar against its owner's will and blow shofar with it. You're not allowed to steal the shofar lechatchila to use it for the mitzvah of shofar. Va'afilu nisyashu ha'bailim imenu. And that's true even if the bailim were already miyayish. Umikoshkein de levarich alav. And certainly you can't make a bracha over blowing a stolen shofar. Mishum beitzea berech miyetzes Hashem. This is a pasuk in Tehillim where David HaMelech says, beitzea, a robber, berech, if he makes a bracha, niyetzes Hashem. It's like he's a kaifer in the Rebbeinu Shalom. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. You're giving the Rebbeinu Shalom a bracha, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav, who sanctified us with mitzvahs, and you're making that bracha over a stolen shofar. It's ridiculous. So you certainly couldn't make a bracha. V'ayin le'el siman yud aleph sivav b'bir halacha ta'afilu ha'yayish v'shina rishus ha'shina ma'isa gam kein kedai levarich. Let's say you know that the shofar was stolen, and you know that the bailam were miyayish. Not only were the bailam miyayish, but also there was a shinui rishus. It was removed from the rishus, from the property of the owner, and it was transferred to somebody else's property. Or you made a change in the guf of the shofar. You went ahead and you trimmed it or you decorated it. These are things that also take away ownership from the original owner. Usually in Bab Mitzvah, we say that when you have the combination of Yush and Shinoi Maisa or Shini Rishus, that could remove ownership from the original owner. Still and all, the Berurah Halacha says over there, Gam kein kedai levarich. Still, you should not make a bracha on a stolen shofar. The Kasva Achrayim, the Achrayim write, the mutter lital shofar shel chaveroi below yedi osoi v'liskayaboy. Till now, we were talking about a stolen shofar. How about we're not speaking about a stolen shofar? Let's say when Rosh Hashanah there were 2 minyanim in shul. So the first minyan finished, and the Baal Tekeah left his shofar on the bima. Now the olim comes in for the second minyan, and the Baal Tekeah comes and he says, whoops, I forgot my shofar. Oh look, there's a shofar laying over there on the bima. So now you want to use that shofar, and the owner, the real owner of the shofar, he has no idea. You're not stealing the shofar. You're not using the shofar bal karchai against the will of the owner. You're using the shofar below yediyasai. You're using the shofar without his knowledge and without his explicit assent. So we don't, but not stealing it from him. So over there, the Achrayim write that that's a mutter. That you're allowed to do. Because a person is very happy that a mitzvah should be done with his property. So certainly the owner of the shofar, he left it on the bima. Now he finds out that they blew with it for the second minyan. Adarabbi, he's going to be very happy. Baruch Hashem, another mitzvah was done with my property. And certainly he is agreeable to this. And not only that, says the Chavetz Chaim, you could use this rationale to go ahead and blow all 100 kailos with that shofar. Afal pisha in a medina. Even though may ikra did, we don't need 100 kailos, right? We don't need 100 kailos, strictly speaking, to be yotze the mitzvah. That's only a minig. But kevin shenagu kain, since the minig is to blow 100 kailos, bevadai lo yimcha bazeh. Certainly, the Chavetz Chaim says the true owner of the shofar would have no problem with this. Now, it is interesting that and I think I saw it brought down here in a footnote. Let me see if I can find it quickly. That the Rishiv Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh Levracha, has a tshuva. Yes, if you take a look at footnote number 16, footnote number 16 is all the way at the bottom of the first column, but if you go to the second column, so it's the second paragraph of footnote number 16. He says over here, Ubizmanenu, nowadays, sheyesh anoshim shemakpidim shelo yishtamshu betalisai sehem. We find this halacha also by a talis. It's brought down that the halacha is, if you find somebody's talis in shul, and you need a talis, you're allowed to put on somebody else's talis, and you're allowed to make a bracha on it. For the same rationale. Because like the Chavetz Chaim said, he said, because people are very happy that you should do a mitzvah with their property. And therefore, to put on somebody else's talis, adarabah, the person is going to be very happy you're doing a mitzvah with his talis. Says Dirshu Zatzal, nowadays, when we find that there are people who are makpid, and they don't want other people to use their talesim, then histapik ha'aruch hashulchan, the aruch hashulchan is mesupik, em noya gadin chekasav hashulchan aruch sham, shemutar lehistamish betalish al chaveroi. If nowadays we know that there are people that are makpid, they don't want you to use their talis, then maybe we can't use this rationale to allow you to use somebody else's talis. V'nireh shegam l'gabe shofar yesh ladon musafik zeh. It makes sense that you would have the same suffix by a shofar. Sheken bizmanenu nowadays, yesh shemakpidim shelo yishtamshu b'shofrei seim. There are people who are not happy that you should use their shofar. And he says something very interesting here. Mishum, and if you're wondering what that next word is, it's hygiene. Mishum hygiene u'chadayma. And certainly nowadays, unfortunately, in the era of COVID, yeah, we could imagine that there are people that don't want you. I don't want you to put your lips on my shofar, and then I'm going to pick up the shofar and I'm going to blow the shofar. So the Rishiva Zatzal is misupik, whether or not you could extend. And the truth is, if you want to see why he's really misupik about it, I left it out. But if you take a look at the first paragraph of footnote number 16, Ubir b'shalos tshuva zikrish Moshe she'eina kavana sheyesh litlois sheroiv ha'anoshim misratzim bekach. When the Chavetz Chaim uses the lashon the nichalei la'anish lemeban mitzvah b'memoinoi, that the reason this is mutter is because we know people are happy if you do mitzvahs with their property. It's not pshat that it's a roiv that we just assume. We know that most people are happy to see that that a mitzvah is done with their property, and therefore we could assume that he doesn't mind. The Rishiva Zatzal says no, shekein ein dai bekach. That wouldn't be sufficient. Shaharei ein holchin b'mammon achar roiv. We know that roiv is a very powerful decider in halacha, but not by hilchas mammonis, not by my monetary law. So over there we don't use roiv. So what? Just because roiv people would be okay with it, I could assume that the owner of this shofar is okay? Ela kavani hi shekula misratza bekach. In halacha, when they use this logic that nichalei leinish lemeba mitzvah b'moinai, it's an assumption that everybody feels that way. And that's why the Aruch HaShulchan says, if we know that there are people that don't feel that way, then we can't, then very possible we can't make that assumption. Okay. So that was Siv Beis. Now we go to Siv Gimel. Taka b'shofar shel avodas kechavim shel Yisrael. Let's say you blew shofar using a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a yid. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah cut in Yud. Shel avodas kechavim shel Yisrael. A shofar that belongs to a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a yid. What does that mean? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kegoin she'avad lo shofar. You have Nebuch a yid who worshipped a shofar. He bowed down to a shofar to worship the shofar, a meshugana. So Kegoin she'avad lo shofar. V'hu adin, or kisheshimesh bai lifnei avodah zarah shaloi. Or he used the shofar to serve his avodah zarah. Nebuch a yid has an avodah zarah, and the way he worships his avodah zarah is he blows shofar in front of it. So in that case, shatak alafaneh, he blew in front of it. So then this is a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a yid. Let's go back to the mechaber. Taka b'shofar shel avodas kechavim shel Yisrael. If you blew shofar using a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a yid, la yatza. Over there, you're not yotza the mitzvah of shofar. Why? She'eino b'teila olamis, because the halacha of avodah zarah is an avodah zarah that belongs to a yid cannot become batel. There's no way to nullify it and make it cease to be avodah zarah. Once a yid worships it, there's no way to be mevatel it. And therefore, the halacha of this object is that it is holich l'sreifa. It has to be burnt. So since it's oimid l'sreifa, since it's something which is standing, ready to be burned, according to halacha, therefore we say, v'chatuse michtas shiurei. Its minimum shear, its minimum measurement is chopped up. What does that mean? We know that a shofar, we're going to learn soon, that a shofar has a minimum size. A shofar has to have, you can't blow shofar, you can't be yotze the mitzvah with a tiny little itty bitty 2-inch shofar. It has to have a minimum size. This shofar does not have the minimum size. Why not? Because since it's a shofar of avodah zarah, and since it belongs to a yid, and therefore it could never lose its status of avodah zarah, there's no way to be mevatel it, that in the eyes of halacha, this shofar is standing ready to be burned, and it's as if it was already burned. So when we look at that shofar, you know what we see? We see a pile of ashes. Does a pile of ashes have the minimum measurement required for a shofar? No, that's what it means. V'chetuse mechtas shiurei. Its minimum shear is chopped up, is ground up. It doesn't have the minimum shear. And therefore, you blow in the shofar, you're not blowing in a kosher shofar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cutting Yud Aleph. She'ena b'tela. There's no way to nullify this avodah zarah. There's no way to remove its status of avodah zarah. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Ritzon Eloimar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Tekevan di efsher b'shum pam sheteheni teres. Since there's no way to be matir this shofar for hana, it's avodah zarah, and its status of avodah zarah can never be removed. Val karchach liibud koi, and this shofar is standing to be destroyed. Excuse me, I'm sorry, bear with me. Okay. This shofar is standing to be destroyed. That's the only thing that this shofar is headed for, is to be destroyed. L'sreifa, it's going to be burned. Or to be thrown into the Yam HaMelach. Harehu kimisha einoi. It's as if it doesn't exist. It's considered already chopped up. V'loy adif mi shofar kosher. It's no better than a kosher shofar. V'rak she'ein boi shir gadloi shuhu pasel. It's no different than a shofar of a ram which is perfectly kosher, with the exception that it doesn't have the minimum size. Shuhu pasel, which is pasel. V'choshken hacha. Certainly here too, this is also pasel. So that's when we're dealing with a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a yid. Now, how about if we're dealing with a shofar of avodah zarah that does not belong to a yid, it belongs to a non-Jew? Says the Mechaber Weiter by the Ois Cotton Yud Beis for the Mishnah Berurah, 3 lines down the middle of the line. Aval b'shel avodas kechavim shel ovid kechavim. However, if we have a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a non-Jew, v'chein b'mishamshei avodas kechavim shel ovid kechavim, or we have a shofar that was used to serve the avodah zarah of a non-Jew, lo yiska, then lechatchila you should not use it for shofar blowing because it's a davar mos. It's a disgusting object. It was used for avodah zarah. But v'im takabai, but if you did use it b'diavad, yotza, the people who hear the shofar are yotza the mitzvah. Explains the Chofetz Chaim in Ois Cotton Yud Beis. Aval shalovid kechavim, if it's a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a non-Jew. Kigoin, for example, shematza shofar avodah zarah shel nachri, a yid found, it was Rosh Hashanah, he needs a shofar to blow in, and he found on the street a shofar of avodah zarah that belongs to a non-Jew. Or he knew he needed a shofar, and he knows his neighbor John has a shofar. He saw it in his house, but it's a shofar of avodah zarah, and he went and he borrowed it from him. In that case, Ois Cotton Yud Gimel, lo yiska. Lechatchila, certainly you should not use it for shofar blowing. Mishum demois, because it's disgusting and it's reprehensible. You're going to serve the Rabbeinu Shalom with a shofar that belongs to avodah zarah? Va'afilu b'nispatel, even if the non-Jew was mevatel it. What does that mean? The non-Jew took it, and the non-Jew said, I'm no longer serving this. I'm no longer worshiping it. It's not an avodah zarah, and maybe he broke something off it. He did a ma'aseh to be mevatel it, that it's no longer an avodah zarah. Va'afilu b'nispatel gam kein asa lechatchila lekama poskim. Many poskim hold that it still remains reprehensible, and it's still something which is mos that should not be used for avodas Hashem. Ois Cotton Yud Daled. In this case, yotza, you are yotza the mitzvah. Afilu kaidem shenis battle. You yotze the mitzvah of shofar even before the non-Jew was mevatel. So it's still a shofar of avodah zarah. If you used it, b'di'evet you yotze the mitzvah. Vatam, the reason is, dekevan she'efsher levatloi kidin avodah zarah shel nachri, since the halacha of avodah zarah, the halacha of a chayfetz of avodah zarah that belongs to a non-Jew, the avodah zarah of a non-Jew is, there is a way to make it mutter, and that is for the guy to be mavatalit. So since it's possible to remove the status of avodah zarah off of this shofar, because the halacha is shenachri matzi mevatalei, that the non-Jew could be mevatalit, and if the non-Jew is mevatalit, it takes away the status of avodah zarah. So leishayich beiloymar harehi kemisha eina. So then the logic of ktusei mechta shiurei doesn't apply. The only time we say ktusei mechta shiurei is when something is certainly oimid l'sreifa. If we know that this shofar is destined to sreifa, because there's no possible way to make it mutter, there's no possible way to take off the status of avodah zarah, like if it's the avodah zarah of a yid, then we say ktusei mechta shiurei. But if it's a shofar of avodah zarah of a non-Jew, there is a way to remove the status of avodah zarah, and that is if the non-Jew is mavatalit. So then we don't say ktusei mechta shiurei. It's not definitely oimid l'sreifa. Maybe one day the guy will be mavatal l'shem avodah zarah from it, and then it doesn't have to be burned. And that's why b'di'evet, if you used it for shofar, you yotze. The efshar loy tavei klal lidei sreifa, because maybe it's not destined for being burnt. Maybe it'll never be burnt. Now, the Chavetz Chaim Bavorins, v'im mishum shenena me'isurei hana, you'll come back to me and you'll say, but Rabbi Weiss, there's another problem. The problem is, it's true that you don't have the problem of ktusei mechta shiurei, but we have a different problem. Avodah zarah is aser b'hana, and you're deriving hana. You're using this shofar, and you're being yotze the mitzvah of shofar with it, so you're deriving benefit from it, and you're not allowed to derive benefit from avodah zarah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that's not a problem. Gam kein loy aser, that's not aser. The kiyam mitzvah loy mikri hana saguf. That's not called hana. There's no physical pleasure derived by doing a mitzvah. Elohu gzeras melech. Mitzvahs lav le hanois nitnu. When we go to be bekayim the mitzvah of shofar, it might put a smile on our face. We're very happy that we yotze the mitzvah, but we're not doing it to pleasure ourselves. We're not doing it to derive benefit or derive pleasure. We're doing it because it's gzeras hamelech. We're fulfilling the command of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvayis avitzivanu. That's not called a hana, and therefore that's not aser. Upashit, and the Chavetz Chaim says it's obvious. Dem ein lo shofar acher. If you don't have another shofar, you only have this shofar of avodah zarah of a non-Jew. Toikea by lechatchila. You should use it lechatchila, even though it's a davar mos. Kedei shelo levatel mitzvah saseh. Yes, it's a davar mos, but what are you going to do? You have a mitzvah saseh, you have to blow shofar, and b'di'evet it's kosher, so you got to use it. Now continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says that there's a caveat to this halacha. 2 lines from the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch near the end of the line by the Ois Katan Tesvav for the Mishnah Berurah. For who shall niskaven liskais by? This idea that you could use the shofar of avodah zarah of a non-Jew is only if when you pick it up to use it, you have no kavanah to acquire it. Aval niskaven liskais by, but if you pick it up to acquire it, to acquire ownership of it, lo yotza. Now comes back the original problem. You're not yotza. Because now it's an avodah zarah object that belongs to a yid. And now comes back the original problem that you can't be mavatalit and to say mechta shiurei. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Tezvav, v'hu shaloi niskaven liskais by. This only works if you have no kavanah to acquire it. B'shashem mitzai. Let's say we're talking about this shofar of avodah zarah of a non-Jew that you found in the street. So you went and you picked it up. You can't have kavanah when you pick it up to be kainet. You only picked it up because you said, a shofar, I'll take it to shul and I'm blowing it. Vayin bir halacha, where the bir halacha discusses this in greater detail. Ice cotton tezayin, because if you pick it up to acquire it, to have avodas kachavim shal Yisrael, now it becomes an avodah zarah object that belongs to a yid. V'af agav the Yisrael avodah, even though the yid did not worship it, Mikamakam ein lo bittul. Still, the halacha is that there's no way to be mevatel it. There's no way to take off the avodah zarah status off it. Kevin the akshav he shall Yisrael, because now it belongs to a yid, and the halacha is once it belongs to a yid, you can't take off the avodah zarah status. V'yesh kasvai, and there are those that write, Deloy kai rak avodah zarah shall ovid kechavim. Deloy kai, that this only applies rak avodah zarah shall ovid kechavim. Only if the shofar is actually an object of avodah zarah of a non-Jew, meaning that a non-Jew worshipped it. Aval loy amishamshe avodah zarah. But if it's an object that belongs to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew used it to serve his avodah zarah, so it's not the avodah zarah itself. The shofar is not actually an avodah zarah. The shofar was used in the worship of avodah zarah. Then this halacha doesn't apply. Something that a non-Jew used to serve his avodah zarah, afilu boili liyad Yisrael, even if it now belongs to a yid, loy machmarinan behu kulei, we're not so machmir with it. So therefore, if the shofar was used by a non-Jew to worship his avodah zarah, and now a yid picked it up and had kavanah to be kainit, he still could be yotze the mitzvah. V'yesh lahem bittul. Because theoretically, you could take the avodah zarah status off of that shofar. U'kemay the pasuk ha'mechaber b'Yeridei assuming kuf mem vav sif beis. That's how the mechaber paskins in Yeridei and Hilchos avodah zarah. Aber v'yesh machmirin gam bazeh. But there are those who are even machmir by the mishamshei avodah zarah. I see we have still a little time, and really today's day is Nun Ches Amud Beis. So I'm going to try to finish with Siv Gimel. I just reminded myself we're still learning Torah, so the schus of our limud HaTorah should be a schus for Refuah Shalema, for Shlomo Zalman ben Meshem, and Achamari ben Dini Yehudis, and Yisrael Tzvi ben Ruchama Edel Roiza. You should have a Refuah Shalema. Says the Ramah, top line in Ches Amud Beis. V'yesh machmirin, there are those who rule stringently, da'afilu b'shel ovid kechavim eina yoytza, that even if it's an avodah zarah object that belongs to a non-Jew. So again, the shofar is something that the non-Jew worshipped, or he used it in the worship of his avodah zarah. Eina yoytza. We said, the mechaber said, that when it's an avodah zarah object that belongs to a non-Jew, but the evid you're yoytza if you use it. Because why? Because you don't say ketuse mechta shiurei. And we explained why don't you say ketuse mechta shiurei? Because this shofar is not certainly destined to be burned. Maybe the non-Jew will be mevatel it. He'll remove the status of avodah zarah from it, and it will become mutter, and it won't have to be burned. Therefore, we don't say ketuse mechta shiurei. Says the Ramah, not everybody agrees. V'yesh machmirin da'afilu b'shel kechavim eina yoytza, that even with the avodah zarah object of a non-Jew, you cannot be yoytza, because kol zman, it has the status of avodah zarah on it, it is destined to be burned, and we do say ketuse mechta shiurei. Ella, except benisbatel be'erev Yom Tov. If on erev Yom Tov the guy was mevatel it, if on erev Yom Tov the guy removed the status of avodah zarah from it, so now it's mutter, and we don't say ketuse mechta shiurei. But if on erev Yom Tov it was still an avodah zarah object, then when Yom Tov began, it was considered ketuse mechta shiurei, and then we can't use it anymore on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah cutting Yud Zayin ela b'nisbatel. The only way you could use it is if the guy was mevatel it on erev Yom Tov. Hatam, the reason why these machmirim hold that you cannot be yoytze with the shofar, with the avodah zarah shofar of the non-Jew, is for the same reason that we said you cannot be yoytze with the avodah zarah object of a yid, because we say ketuse mechta shiurei. The kevan shehu aser bahana, since right now this shofar is an avodah zarah object, and it is aser bahana, harei hu kechaser min shiurei shu pasel. So we say ketuse mechta shiurei. Right now it is destined to be burned, because right now it still has the status of avodah zarah. V'afagav she'ef shel avatla. Yes, it's true. Possibly, potentially, the guy could be mevatel it, but as of now, he wasn't mevatel it. Mikam akam adayin lo nisbatel. He wasn't mevatel it yet, so it will be isurei kai. So right now, it's a forbidden avodah zarah object which is destined to be burned. So we say ketuse mechta shiurei. Yodches be'erev yomtiv. The only way it's mutter is if the guy was mevatel it on erev yomtiv. The Chavetz Chaim is going to explain why does it have to be that he was mevatel it on erev yomtiv. Let's say he was mevatel it during yomtiv. The emloin is batel b'shashe kiddush hayom, because if he wasn't mevatel it before yomtiv began, imkain loy hayaroi az liskayaboy. If he wasn't mevatel it before Yom Tov began, then at the beginning of Yom Tov it was not roi, it was not fit to be use to be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar. Lefi shitazu shepasal l'skay by kind of mittel v'nidche oz. So that means that at the beginning of Yom Tov it was nidche. Nidche means it was cast aside. It wasn't roi. It wasn't something fit to be used for the mitzvah of shofar. So when Rosh Hashanah began, was this a kosher shofar? No, it was nidche. V'im kain. Now, I want to explain this more clearly. The mitzvah of shofar is chal when Rosh Hashanah begins. Rosh Hashanah is Yom Teruah. Even though you're not going to blow shofar at night, you blow shofar by day. But when Rosh Hashanah begins, that's when the mitzvah of shofar is chal. When the mitzvah of shofar was chal, was this a shofar that was able to be used? No, it was not, according to this shita. This shita holds that even though it's the avodah zarah object of a goy, as long as the goy wasn't mevatel it, it can't be used. At the beginning of Yom Tov, the goy was not yet mevatel it. So when the mitzvah of shofar was chal, this shofar was not right to be used. And therefore, v'im kain, afilu bitloi ha'akom achakach bi Yom Tov, even if tomorrow morning, Rosh Hashanah morning, the guy will be mevatel it, v'hutar, and now it's no longer an avodah zarah object and it's mutter, mikamokim, nevertheless, shema yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs. Maybe by mitzvahs, we paskin lahalacha that there's a concept, once something was cast aside and was not roi to be used for the mitzvah, it could no longer become roi. Once it was not roi, it's forever not roi. Well, kfar nifsal. Only in dina halacha lamaisa, kaimelon kisfara harishona, we paskin like the mechaber, who says that the avodah zarah object of a non-Jew can be used b'di'eved, shu svaras reiv ha-paiskim, that's the way most paiskim hold, va'afilu b'loinis batla klal, and even if the guy never is mevatel from being avodah zarah, b'di'eved yachal liska but yachal liskaya by, b'di'eved you could use it, emen le'acher, if you don't have anything else to use, rak im yinsa achakak shofar kosher, but certainly if you find later on a perfectly kosher shofar, tzarech liskaya by mechadash, you should blow again, lotzeis hidei svarazu, in order to be mekayim the mitzvah, even according to the yesh machmirin brought down by the Ramah, or beli bracha, but you should not make a bracha, because possibly you were already yotze in the mitzvah, so you cannot make a bracha. Okay? We're going to stop over here. I'm glad that we got on to today's page. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The schus of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rabbi Yisrael should send Yeshua's for wisdom and parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the bias goyel tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.